A brand new BMW's headlights cut through the gathering dusk on a country road. The road itself, which the black car was navigating, resembled an armadillo's shell, not due to its strength, but because of the immense number of patches and potholes. So the car moved slowly, despite the empty road. Andre, pleased with his purchase, loved the nighttime and the drive home. He lived in a small town, though he could have long ago bought a place in the best part of Boston and avoided an hour-long commute. Andre had grown up in the countryside and was a sentimental man. He found it hard to give up the open spaces, where you step outside and are surrounded by an immense world, not tall, gray human rookeries where people live by some misunderstanding. Being a wealthy man, he did a lot to improve the town he lived in. With his money, they renovated the library, did a major overhaul of the school, and fixed the roads. So well, in fact, that crossing the town limit felt like entering another country. So smoothly did the car glide on the quality pavement. He always helped his townsfolk if they had financial problems. Once, when a former classmate of his was diagnosed with cancer, Andre paid for her full treatment at a top hospital. That's the kind of man he was. He loved life and wanted to share that love with others. Not without a certain pride, he thought about this on a quiet, cool August evening, glancing absently at the harvested field. The stubble, prickly like a hedgehog, beckoned him. The car slowed down. Andre pulled over, got out, took off his shoes, glanced quickly up and down the road. He didn't need to be seen acting like a child, and then ran out onto the field, laughing loudly, dashing back and forth. Each step answered with a slight pain. Sometimes stalks pricked the soles of his feet, no softer than needles, but it was a sweet pain. Every breath filled his lungs with fresh country air. Every movement brought Andre back to his childhood, when he and the other boys would rush to the harvested field after school to play soccer barefoot on the stubble. They say you can't bring that time back, but tonight Andre had managed it, if only briefly. He closed his eyes and seemed to see the blazing sun, the yellow wheat stubble, the weeds swaying by the roadside, felt the sweet smell of flowering plants, the dampness of the dew, the warmth of the dark bread he loved for breakfast, heard the strict voice of his first-grade teacher, the laughter of classmates, the shy whisper of a girl he had a crush on. The illusion lasted only moments, while his eyes were shut, but its vividness was astounding, and Andre was sure that in that instant he had truly traveled back to the past and retraced the path that led him to this very spot. Then he opened his eyes and saw someone standing on the other side of the field, watching him intently. In the twilight, it was hard to make out who it was. The figure was awkward. At first, Andre even thought it was a gnarled old tree. He knew an old willow grew in that field. But then the silhouette moved, and in that movement, there was a hidden threat. He didn't know why, but Andre quickly walked back to his car, grabbed his shoes from the roadside, jumped in, locked the doors, and looked fearfully in that direction. The silhouette was gone. The stranger had left. Yes, Andre was a philanthropist. He was loved and respected in his hometown, but he also had plenty of enemies, including those who would be happy if Andre disappeared or landed in the hospital for a long time. So he was usually cautious, but who would have expected to be watched at such an hour on an empty road surrounded by fields? Cursing himself for a moment of weakness, he started the car and, accelerating, planned to get home quickly. But the next second, a woman in a white dress appeared out of nowhere on the roadside, trembling all over and wandering aimlessly. Andre hit the brakes, honked, but the stranger seemed to hear nothing. The situation was growing more tense. Clearly the work of competitors. Maybe just hit her? No one could prove anything anyway. However, There didn't seem to be anyone else around, so Andre decided to get out. The moment he opened the door, he heard a piercing shriek. The woman was sobbing, on the verge of hysteria. Softening a little, Andre approached her. "Is something wrong?" he asked. The stranger turned. A pale face, flushed with blood, tear-filled eyes, trembling shoulders. She looked like a mad woman on the edge. "Get your daughter a car," she forced out, and then began to wail at the top of her lungs. Truly horse-sized lungs. "Is that a threat?" Andre fumed. But then something happened in his head, a kind of fog. And now he stood alone on the roadside. Behind him, his car. A light breeze tousled his unruly hair. Nighttime silence spread over the surroundings. Andre couldn't understand anything. He got in the car and drove home as if hypnotized. As he drove, he saw an ambulance parked right outside his gates. Someone was being carried out on a stretcher. Andre opened the car door and stepped out uncertainly. Everything happened as if in a dream. His wife came running toward him, sobbing. Someone was shouting, and on the stretcher, he saw his daughter, unable to tell if she was alive or unconscious. Before he could finish the thought, darkness clouded his eyes, as if someone had pressed a remote control and switched Andre off like a mechanical toy. I was sitting sideways on the back seat of my old sedan. I opened the door, stuck my legs out, leaned my head out of the car, and lit a cigarette, biting into a warm, ketchup and mayo-slathered cheburek. It was hot. Not a cloud in the sky. The leaves on the old poplars lining the road hadn't turned yellow yet, but already looked overripe, ready to shrivel and fall. The improvised parking lot across from the market was shaded by trees, which is why I had chosen this spot for my lunch break. Despite the late summer heat, the market was full of people. Everyone was bustling, talking loudly, selling, buying, unloading, loading, haggling, and engaging in other typical merchant activities. I was just chewing another bite, trying not to get ketchup on myself, when my phone rang. I was expecting an important client call, so I got flustered, fumbled for the phone, jerked my hand, the one holding the cheburek, and as a result, a greasy drop of ketchup mixed with mayo landed on my thigh, staining my jeans. Good thing they're not new," I muttered quietly, cursing under my breath as I reached for the phone. Red Zenoza flashed on the screen. Katya. I rushed for nothing. I'll talk to her quickly. "Hello? Hello, Vyacheslav. It's Katya. I know, it's saved in my phone. And you can use you," I said tiredly. "Oh, sorry. Ugh, you sorry. It's just my parents gave me this phone after my exams, and I'm still not used to the caller's name showing up. So the reason I'm calling. Have you heard of the town of Birch Hill, out in the suburbs?" I'd never heard of this town, but I knew that if I said no, Katya would bury me in a pile of unnecessary information, down to the town's founding date and the founder's name. "Heard of it? And have you heard about the scary things happening there?" "No." Here I had no choice. "Well, they say there's an epidemic of Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever there. Horrible stories. People are bleeding from their urine and stool. Fever's over 104. They're almost at death's door." I looked at my cheburek and grimaced. Bon appetit, Slava, ran through my head. And this ketchup stain on my pants. Bloody mess. Ugh. They lied to me. So I went on Odnoklassniki. Heard of that social network? It's new recently. What Odnoklassniki? What social network? And you can use you. Sorry. Ugh, you sorry. Odnoklassniki is a clone of a Western site with similar content. An amateur, non-commercial clone, but the number of users is growing very fast. So, as they write on forums, it's non-commercial for now. Of course, if they connect ads and it starts making money, it might be more profitable to leave it free. But something tells me in our country, with its underdeveloped service market, that won't work, and sooner or later they'll make registration paid. Although I haven't delved into the financial model of such sites yet, I see several options. Katia, get to the point. I don't have time to chat. I'm waiting for a work call. Yeah, sorry. Ugh, you sorry. The point is, I got in touch with a resident of that town who's registered on Odnoklassniki. I managed to get him talking, and he told me an amazing story. It's not a fever at all, but something completely incomprehensible. First, the daughter of the local millionaire got sick. Andrei Korovin, I think his name is. I looked him up in the local press. He's a very well-known man in the city. One of the richest residents. Positions himself as a philanthropist. He was born in that same town, takes care of it. Korovin himself took to his bed after this incident. They say he either lost his mind or caught it from his daughter. But the latter is unlikely because, attention, only children are getting sick. Infections don't spread like that. This is very interesting. Thanks for the info, but I need to free up the lines so... Yes, I won't keep you you. It's just I'm almost sure this is all connected to one of the most amazing legends from Germany, though there are nuances there too. The legend of the Pied Piper, she announced solemnly, as if this phrase was supposed to tell me something important. I don't know that legend, I replied in the tone of a man who has resigned himself to the inevitable. How can you be, you, so ignorant? You don't know about the social network? Don't know about the Pied Piper of Hamelin either? And you're not that old. That's it, smarty pants, I'm hanging up, I declared decisively. Wait, sorry, I just wanted to ask you, you, to come with me to that town when it's convenient for you. Aw, okay, I'll call you back, I replied and hung up. Almost 3 minutes. I hoped no one had called me during that time. I still felt responsible for Altana's death. I understood that with her personality, Katia would find it hard to make friends, so I decided to humor her a bit, to atone for my guilt that way. And this story reminded me of times I couldn't think about without a nostalgic tear in my eye. Maybe this time it would end better, and we'd just go to the town, see that nothing supernatural was happening, and return home. While I was thinking this, my phone rang again. But it wasn't a client, it was my boss. Slava, why don't you answer when clients call? Why do I have to justify myself to him because you're chatting with someone? He was angry. Calm down, Pavel Viktorovich. That was about an order too, I lied. I'll call the client back right now and apologize. He just grunted into the phone and hung up. I sighed. Why does only Murphy's Law work flawlessly? They called me exactly when I was talking to Katia. By 4 p.m., I was free. I called Katia, picked her up from the library, and we drove straight to the town. Without further ado, she began laying out her hypothesis about what was happening there. The legend of the Pied Piper is unique because it appears not only in folk tales, but also in historical chronicles. Moreover, the exact date of one of the events it tells is known. That's a unique situation for such stories. A long time ago, the city of Hamelin was overrun by rats. The residents couldn't cope with the scourge, but then a wandering musician, a piper dressed in multicolored rags, came to their aid. He appeared in Hamelin and promised to rid the city of rats for a reward. The city authorities, in the heat of the moment, promised him as much gold as he could carry. The piper agreed, started playing his flute, and the rats, enchanted by the melody, followed him to the river, where they drowned. When he returned to the city for his reward, the authorities said they would pay less than promised. The piper didn't agree. Claudia looked at me excitedly, raised her left hand, and stuck out her index finger. He returned to the city, played his flute in a new way, and led all the children out of the city. See the parallels? You can use you, I reminded her, then continued. So you think this Pied Piper appeared in Birch Hill and infected all the children with Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever? The parallels aren't really clear. What does a musician have to do with it? Claudia looked at me as if I were a complete idiot. She sighed. The legend of the Pied Piper isn't about a musician. It's about breaking a given word. Have you read the Divine Comedy? Though why am I asking? Her dismissive attitude was starting to irritate me. It's one of the greatest works of medieval poetry. By Dante Alighieri. It tells how Dante himself, with the Roman poet Virgil, descended into the underworld and passed through all the circles of hell. Do you know who was at the center, suffering the worst torments? Traitors. Satan was waiting for Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. The first betrayed Christ, the other two betrayed Julius Caesar. Betraying someone who trusted you was the worst crime a person could commit from the perspective of medieval morality. We've largely borrowed this idea. In all the cultures I've studied, traitors are viewed extremely negatively. The Pied Piper of Hamelin was deceived, even though he took his employers at their word. Then followed the most terrible revenge one could imagine. The piper led all the children out of the city. And you know what's most interesting? That date coincides with the dates of the Black Death epidemic in Europe. It's quite possible that the Pied Piper leading children away is a metaphorical image of children dying from the bubonic plague. But this isn't the bubonic plague, it's another disease, sent by a sorcerer. I think you're grasping at straws. In our case, it's just children who caught a fever. Who deceived whom here? I haven't told you everything yet. My father knows this Corrigan. Did business with him personally. Well, this scoundrel, you'd have to look hard to find another. He doesn't keep his word, cheats people out of large sums of money, constantly lies. That's how he got rich. Perhaps he crossed paths with a character who served as the prototype for the piper in the medieval legend. And the result is this epidemic. This version sounded more logical. I didn't argue and decided to figure it out on the spot. Claudia continued talking about the Divine Comedy, the history of medieval Europe, similar legends about musicians who enchanted people with their instruments. The only thing that came to my mind were gusli that made people dance. Claudia, I interrupted her, but that legend ended badly, and there's no hint of how to save the children. Yes, not in the legend, but we have plot type 332S according to the Arne Thompson classification. No, doesn't ring a bell, I said, and predictably saw Claudia roll her eyes. Outwitting death. We need to find out from Corrigan who he deceived, and either force Corrigan to repay the debt, or deceive the sorcerer who sent the plague to become the piper's next victims ourselves, I remarked ironically. It looked like I was being dragged into another murky story. And after Sasha's letter, I had promised myself I would never get involved in trouble again. Claudia began to explain that there were reliable ways. You just had to read fairy tales carefully. But her arguments didn't convince me, so I quickly lost interest in the stories she was telling and began to admire the rather monotonous landscape. Tree lines, harvested fields, and so on to the horizon. However, Claudia didn't need an interlocutor. She was perfectly fine playing the lecturer, and all I had to do was grunt in the right places. When we were almost at Birch Hill, we hit a completely ruined section of road. Potholes everywhere that couldn't be avoided. We had to slow down. The landscape on the right was slightly different. A mound in the field with an old weeping willow growing on it, like a girl who had lost her beloved. The tree was bent under the weight of its branches, leaning to the side. It just grew, all twisted. The bend in the trunk was so severe that individual leaves reached the ground, swayed in the wind, and from a distance really did resemble long maiden hair. Something sinister emanated from that field and tree. And apparently, I wasn't the only one who felt it. Even the irrepressible chatterbox Katia fell silent. When we passed that section, it became easier to breathe. But neither I nor Katia said anything else, especially since a couple of minutes later we arrived. The town turned out to be small, but very cozy. Neat village houses with low wooden fences, good asphalt roads, clean streets, sidewalks paved with tiles in the center. It was even surprising to see such things in what was essentially a village. The only thing that spoiled it was the terrible desolation on the streets. Not a soul. It seemed all the residents had died out. On the way to the Korovins' house, we saw an ambulance on duty near a neighborhood of two-story houses. The doctor sat outside in masks and watched my old sedan with disapproval. Katia and I exchanged glances but again remained silent. After driving around the town a bit, I found the right street and pulled up to a luxurious mansion resembling an old castle. The gates had metal lattices with lions and shields. The house itself was surrounded by a high fence of light yellow brick, behind which nothing was visible except the second and third floors. "Will they even let us in there?" I asked Katia. She shrugged. "So what's your plan then? I thought you arranged a meeting with him. It's already 5 p.m. Bad chance he'll open up for us." "Let's try," Katia suggested, her overconfidence quickly dissolving. "You can use you," I mumbled. I got out, walked to the gate located to the side of the main entrance. I saw an intercom, pressed the button. "Yes," a sleepy male voice answered quickly. "Hello. We've come to see Andre." I stumbled, not knowing his patronymic. "Mr. Korovin." I quickly found the word. "He's not receiving anyone now. Contact him next week." "Yes, but I really need to speak with him about a matter." "Did you hear me? Contact him next week. If anything changes, you'll be given an appointment." The tone of the man's voice changed. Threatening notes appeared in it. "Okay, sorry," I replied, deciding not to provoke, and returned to the car. "Nothing?" Katia asked, already knowing the answer. I nodded nonetheless. "Well, then let's go see the guy I was corresponding with. Maybe he can tell us something," she suggested. "Let's go!" I really didn't want to leave the town empty-handed. At least a crumb of information wouldn't hurt. Katia's new friend lived on the outskirts of Birch Hill with his parents, aunt, and grandmother. The internet had been recently installed, paid for by Korovin. More than that, the guy got his computer thanks to Korovin too. He had bought decommissioned office equipment from a bankrupt company for a pittance and distributed it absolutely free to families with children in his hometown. The guy was flustered when Katia knocked on his door. He didn't invite us in but came out himself and whispered that a quarantine was about to be introduced in the town. The residents were staying home and not even going to work. For the last 2 to 3 days, only children had been getting sick. And no one believed it was Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. And at the end, he added that some crazy woman had appeared in the field. Walks around at night and cries. Residents who drive into the city late in the evening have seen her, but every time they try to talk to her, she disappears. Everyone is scared and doesn't know what to do next. "And I would invite you in, but my parents would be unhappy," the guy honestly admitted to Katia. She said she understood and said goodbye. I, listening to the conversation with half an ear, remembered the death of my friend Lyoka in 2000 and realized that I might be facing the same monster that killed him. When Katia returned to the car, I immediately shared my guesses with her. It's not some piper, Katia. I saw something similar 6 years ago. It's Marzana, the Slavic goddess of death. Goddess of death? Katia laughed. And who told you that? Professor Yakovlev. I admitted honestly. I'll have to find out who he is, Katia said, grimacing. But I can say with confidence that he wasn't very knowledgeable. Marzana is an effigy, not a goddess. They burned an effigy on Maslenitsa, I think, to see off winter and welcome spring. Armchair mythology turned this effigy into a goddess, but no one takes that seriously anymore. I didn't know what armchair mythology was, but I didn't ask and sulked. After Sasha's letter, my attitude toward the professor had become complicated, but I still felt offended for him. Katia, however, continued to chatter about the piper and ignored the story of her acquaintance from the town. Half an hour later, we reached the library where I dropped Katia off. So shall we go there again? Tomorrow we'll try to contact Korovin by mail. I'll write a letter, we'll drop it in his mailbox, and see what happens. We have to live until tomorrow first, I said grimly, overcome by bad premonitions. After saying goodbye and thanking me, Katia left. I wasn't in a hurry to leave, lost in thought. No, I won't get involved in anything else. And I need to get rid of this girl. This is the last time I help her. Next time, I'll try to talk to her, tell her my story, explain why she shouldn't mess with all this. If it doesn't help, let her do what she wants. Having decided this, I drove home. Had dinner with my mom. We discussed the news. I called work and found out I only had to come in the afternoon tomorrow because the client couldn't make it earlier. I quietly cursed to myself, as if fate itself was pushing me toward the field, that willow, that Marzana. I pushed these thoughts away, sat down at the computer I'd bought a year after the army for studying, and then, of course, started playing games and exploring the internet on it, typed Black Death into the Rambler search bar, opened the first few links, and grunted with satisfaction. Tomorrow, that know-it-all was in for a heavy blow. Now there was just one more thing to do. And to hell with what I promised myself. Mom, I need to go to a site, I'll be late, I said to my mom. What is this at night? She was outraged. In my day, a manager would be fired for that. In your day, there was no unemployment, and I barely found this job. And with such a good salary, I reminded my mom, kissed her on the cheek, and left. And then the journey back to Birch Hill. It was scary. But at the same time, I felt a certain excitement, as if I had returned to the times when the professor and I fearlessly marched toward evil spirits, without really understanding anything or delving into it. No more monotonous days, no regular job. I'm planning to enter university, and can't even imagine that in a few years I'll graduate from an electrotechnical college. If you had asked me then, I wouldn't have said I was happy. But if you ask me now, I'd say the 90s and 2000s were the most magical time of my life. Lost in these memories, the road flew by unnoticed, and I didn't immediately realize that it wasn't some belated pedestrian moving along the roadside, but a woman in a white dress. A waxen face, tear-filled eyes, hands reaching for the light for me. I hit the brakes before even reaching the section with the broken road. The woman looked straight into my eyes, but didn't move. She just stretched out her hands, moaned, burst into tears, tried to say something. I got scared, as if I'd been thrown out of bed into a pool of ice water while half asleep. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I reversed, turned around, hit the gas, glanced quickly in the mirror. The woman remained in place, reaching her hands out toward me, but didn't move. And a few moments later, darkness swallowed her, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I returned home, went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned, thought about how to save the unfortunate children, remembered Lyoka, the professor, my army years. And, let's be honest, I anticipated wiping the nose of that red-haired know-it-all. Unable to sleep, I called Katia at 6:30. Surprisingly, she answered in a cheerful voice. She seemed to have been awake for a long time. "Yes, I've been thinking about it all night too," she confirmed instead of a greeting. "Thinking in the wrong direction," I said with quiet triumph in my voice. "You've been guessing about your Piper, but you were wrong about everything. First, the Black Death in Western Europe was not in the 11th century, but in the 14th. A deliberate pause. "It can't be," Katia replied nervously. "But that's not all. I knew right away that the Piper version was nonsense, so I decided to check mine and went to that field with the willow late last night. Remember? And you know who I saw there? Marzana." Another pause. I was enjoying my triumph. "Why didn't you call me?" Genuine offense in her voice, plus irritation and confusion. It felt so good to wipe her nose. "Would your parents have let you go?" Silence in response. "That's what I thought." Then I told her about my encounter with Marzana last night, recounted the story of how Lyoka and I had encountered her, and asked what to do next. The residents of that village had tried to drown the effigy, but it didn't help much. Something about a plot to deceive death. 332s. "Wait, Slava," Katia said thoughtfully. "You're saying it was a woman all in white who was crying?" "Yeah." "She stood in place and reached her hands out to you?" "Uh-huh." "Uh-huh." Katia fell silent. "So what are we going to do?" I broke the prolonged silence. "Well, look. Ugh, you look. I need to go to the library, clarify something. I'll call you, you later." "Okay." Without waiting for an answer, she hung up and disappeared for 2 days. I was tempted to call her myself, but pride wouldn't allow it. Let the girl admit her defeat. And to be honest, I didn't believe Marzana could be defeated. She would leave on her own sooner or later. We just had to wait for that moment. That's what happened last time. Nevertheless, Katia called. She was laconic, asked me to pick her up at 11 p.m. from her house. I tried to ask what had happened. She promised to tell me everything when we met. I didn't insist, waited until evening, and drove to the appointed place. A disheveled Katia ran out of her building, opened the car door, jumped in the back seat for some reason, looked up, and waved to someone. "Let's go, quick," she whispered. When we got out of her yard, she asked to stop and move to the front seat. "I had to lie to my parents. Told them you're the brother of a future classmate I've become friends with. We supposedly agreed I'd spend the night at her place today, and you're just giving me a ride there. Explain what happened." Yes. Let's go to that field where you met Marzana." She pronounced the last word with obvious mockery. Something had happened that made Katia think she was about to get revenge for her embarrassment. "Well, I went to the libraries yesterday, found out everything. It's a rare fairy tale. Then I took a bus to Birch Hill. Dropped a letter for Korovin there, where I expressed one assumption and proposed a solution. I left my number, and today he called me. Can you imagine?" She looked at me slyly, expecting some reaction. Of course, I was tempted to ask why he didn't call me. But I knew that was exactly what she expected, so I kept quiet and then even spurred her on. So what next? Not getting what she wanted, Katia turned away, sulked, and continued in a changed tone. And then we're meeting him today in the field. To clarify something, it's not some Marzana. A proponent of armchair mythology couldn't be right. It's a white lady, Bella Baba. Katia perked up again. The fairy tale is this, and it's not in Athanasiev's collection. A father and daughter went to the city to sell pots. On the way, they met a woman in white. She was crying and told the father to buy a white dress for his daughter. Afterward, the daughter fell ill, and the father went to a wise man. He advised him to buy that dress and cut it up right in front of the white lady. That's how he saved his daughter. So I wrote to Korovin that on the night his daughter got sick, a woman in white met him in the field and asked him to get some item for his daughter. I wrote that I know how to cure his daughter, but for that, he must come to that very field late in the evening with that item. I was waiting, and today he called me and said he was ready to meet. Can you imagine? I didn't even believe it would work. Good job. I praised Katia sincerely but decided to add a spoonful of tar so she wouldn't get too cocky. Listen, so what about the Black Death? She gave me a scorching look. I disarmed her with a smile, forcing her to smile back. You are so vindictive, she said, but she seemed to have learned her lesson. Night. The sky was overcast with clouds. A storm was approaching. You couldn't see a thing around. The only island of light on the broken country road was the switched-off headlights of my old sedan. We'd been sitting for 15 minutes. I was worried about the battery. What if it dies? We'd have to wait here until morning until someone helps. I looked at Katia. He'll come, she insisted, but she herself seemed to be starting to doubt her words. I remembered my mom's words about the children brought from this town. She was on duty. It's horrible, Slava. They are all covered in sores. Not a living spot on their skin, some kind of irritation. They're delirious, suffering. No one has ever seen anything like it. Blood comes out with urine, nails fall out. It's not some fever. They said that to calm people down. Now everyone is struggling to make a correct diagnosis. They're calling infectious disease specialists from Boston. If this Korovin doesn't show, he'll be the lowest of the low, because it's not just about his daughter. But then, half an hour later, his BMW appeared on the road. He, like me, parked on the side opposite the section where the willows stood. We got out. He walked toward us. Then, nervous, angry. I thought you were some kind of wise woman. I was even surprised your voice was so young, but you're just a kid. Damn it. He began to swear. And you brought some goat along. Who the hell are you, huh? I started to mumble something in response. My fists itched to smash his insolent face. Katia stopped me, tried to explain that she knew how to help. I'm not a wise woman, but my grandmother was one, and I know how to help you. You brought the item the woman demanded you gift to your daughter. Korovin hesitated, lowered his head. He thought for a couple of moments, then nodded and pointed a finger at his car. Katia and I exchanged glances. So he had to destroy it. She told him this. Korovin started laughing. He insulted us again. I resolutely walked toward him, intending to smash his face after all. Katia tried to stop me, but then something changed. Without saying a word, the three of us froze in place and fell silent. It became unnaturally quiet. Even the wind died down. Only the leaves of the willow rustled, parted. From under them slipped out a woman, all in white, with a waxen face, unnaturally long fingers, black, half-rotten nails. She was wailing so loudly that we could hear her howl. Claudia, she wailed, let's slather by you the most beautiful white dress. And quickly, even in the headlights, I could see Claudia pale. She knew what the white lady's words meant. The woman approached, stretching her claw-like hands toward the girl. We backed away. Only Coravin stood frozen, watching what was happening with a dull expression on his face. The woman looked in his direction, smiled, and then something in him seemed to break. He let out an inhuman scream, opened the trunk of his BMW, pulled out a tire iron, and started smashing the windows, the trunk, the mirrors. What are you doing? The woman shrieked. I only asked you to get this car to your daughter. How are you going to see her off on her final journey now? But Coravin hardly listened to her. He jumped onto the roof, started jumping on it until it caved in. Then he opened the hood, pulled out the battery, threw it right on the asphalt, started tearing out all the wires, hitting the engine, ruining the electronics. The white lady recoiled, watching in horror. Coravin looked at her with the expression of a maniac on his face, walked around the car, opened the gas tank, took a lighter from his pocket, and threw it inside. A pillar of flame shot out. Claudia squealed, grabbed my hand, and dragged me away. It's going to blow, she shouted. Thanks to movie cliches. There's nothing in a car to really explode. I only backed up a little, and then realized the woman in white was gone. She had disappeared somewhere. Coravin stood frozen with the tire iron in his hands, looking at the willow. Behind him stood his wrecked car. Smoke and flame shot from the gas tank, but he didn't take his eyes off the inconspicuous tree. Coravin also felt something was wrong with that willow. It wasn't left in the field by accident. They could have uprooted it but were afraid. Before I could finish the thought, his phone rang. Hello, who? Ah, yes. Tears rolled down his cheeks. I'm coming, dear. I'll be there soon, he said into the phone and hung up. With an expression of absolute happiness on his face, he looked in our direction. Yes, please forgive me. I need to get to the hospital. My daughter has come to her senses. Could you give me a ride?